episode 5. Wow, 5 episodes. I can't believe we made
I
it.
know.
They
It is
said it would.
amazing.
They said it would never last, Todd. I am Matt Connarton, and of course, we have Todd Ayer, as always, my partner in crime here. Welcome, Todd.
Hey, how are you, Matt?
Good, good. Happy 4th of July weekend.
Absolutely. Happy 4th.
Absolutely. And this is exciting because for episode 5, we have officially our first guest on Hanging Left. And I'll let you introduce her.
Absolutely. So we have with us today, we are very lucky to have Sarah Chadzinski. She is a very prominent organizer, community organizer, and a licensed educator, and just all around good friend. And she's, fighting the good fight with me. So without any further ado, let's hand it over to Sarah.
We're going to hand it over to you, Sarah. You ready to host the rest of the show?
So yeah, just hand it on over, guys. Let's do this. I'm ready to go. Dive right in.
No, but go ahead, Sarah. Tell us more about yourself, and I'm interested in hearing about some of the, Todd kind of clued me in on some things. I'm interested in hearing about some of the issues that you're concerned with, and so forth, and we can chop it up a little bit, as I think that the young people say that, chop it up.
Yeah, you know what? You're probably you've probably got the lingo better than I do. I as an educator and a mom, I'm always looking to our youth to inform us as how we can do better and keep me updated on the progress of things. But thank you for the introduction. Thank you for having me on the show. It's really wonderful to be here. I appreciate you guys doing this. It's important to have your voices and many voices out there right now with everything that's happening in our country, in our state, in our world. But as for me, I'm a New England girl. I was born and raised on a pick your own apple farm. We had our vegetable patch across the street growing up. I learned how to pickle, and picking strawberries and raspberries this time of year is something of my soul. So, I really enjoy working with people, being with people. And one of the things that has driven me so much to community is actually that foundation that I had growing up on an apple farm, when people would come once a year, people that might not even be with each other in between the time, but once a year they would come back to the same orchard and they would put their picnic blankets down and their kids would play and they would catch up. Right. And it gave me that foundational understanding of how important community is, how important coming together is, and just what can be done there. And so I really took that through into working with kids through education. I've done community education, I've done public education, I've done international education. And all through that, it has been a lot of advocating for kids' rights, advocating for our youth to have a voice, and making sure that they actually have access to the education, the materials, and that those educational facilities are actually funded, that schools have the money that they need, that teachers are being supported in what they need to be able to really truly foster, nurture, and develop the next generation that's going to be leading our country. So that's a background on me in terms of education and myself and growing up here in New England. We've been living in the Granite State now for just about a decade, and I love, the people in New Hampshire. And when I think about the beauty of our children, we have 3 children, my husband and I, 3 children, the beauty of them growing up here in the Granite State with kids and families that have grit, that care about their community, that care about each other, and that care about the state. And that's something that I love so much about New Hampshire. So that's a little introduction to me.
All right, very good. I'm curious to hear more about education, because so obviously you have concerns, and with your background, it makes sense. Sounds like you're someone who's in a good position to identify some of the things that we need to work on, and I would love to hear more about that.
Sure.
Not just in terms of New Hampshire, but nationally. Just what are the things that we need to work on in terms of education?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've got it, Matt. There are so many things to talk about right now. We have healthcare, we have, our economy that is not supporting people in actually living but barely surviving. And education and our economy are so intrinsically linked as well. Education is the backbone of our societies. It allows working families to be in the workplace, and it supports our kids in their development and being a part of our societies. And when we're looking at how to evaluate or revamp or support education, there's so many perspectives on how to do that. Except one of the things that I think is so important, and something that I think we're missing in a lot of what's happening on the federal level, it's like, yeah, let's evaluate things. Let's look at how effective things are. Let's look at, our budgets and how we're spending money. But in that same time, if you're working on rebudgeting for your family and feeding your family, you don't rip out the kitchen. And what we see on a federal level, and now what's being echoed on a state level here in New Hampshire, is we've ripped out the kitchen. We've ripped out the foundational function of being able to support our schools and be able to keep our schools going while we evaluate what is actually needed and how to support them better. And that doesn't actually help us. That stops progress. So we really need to put some time into figuring out, how do we want to move forward? And what are the options for better funding, fair funding, and access to good, full education for our students in New Hampshire? It's one of our constitutional values.
And so, Sarah, also getting into that a little bit further, I know a hot topic as of late was the voucher program. So how do you feel about that? Do you feel like the voucher program is doing this forwarding of education, or do you feel like it's inhibiting and preventing this expansion of education that you talk about is so needed, both in the Granite State and nationally?
Yeah, thanks, Todd. So the voucher program is definitely a hot topic. And one of the issues with the voucher program, there's many, is that it pulls from a funding of tax dollars. And those tax dollars are really meant for schools to get grants or increase their programming. And I keep thinking, if all of those dollars were actually spent effectively and put into our school systems to support our school systems, imagine what could be done. Imagine how many kids could be fed that need to be fed. Imagine how many programs we could develop to support our kids going forward. And what happens with the voucher program is it's actually taking funding away from our public schools. It's taking our tax dollars and giving our tax dollars to any private entity that is not held to any accountability. And I think one of the things that we're seeing across the board, in all situations in our state government and our federal government, is accountability. We want transparency. We want to know where our tax dollars are going. And we want our tax dollars to go to our towns and our cities and our communities, not to, a private school that has its own set of funding options, you know?
So you don't feel safer now that they had Doge to protect us? wasn't Doge supposed to be the ones to make sure our tax dollars went in the right place?
Yeah, well, here we are.
I'm being sarcastic.
I know. Well, here we are 6 months in, and where are tax dollars going? Okay, well, we don't have that transparency. We should have that
Right.
transparency and that accountability. And one of the things is that the voucher program is being, almost in a way of propaganda, saying, oh, this is a choice option for your kids.
Mhm.
Well, if you look at a family like mine, I have my eldest kid is neurodivergent. I homeschool them because school is not the best fit for my eldest, and that's okay. That is our choice to homeschool. But if we applied for the voucher program as a family with modest income, we would not actually be able to send our kid to a private school or other school because it wouldn't be enough money. So what's happening is this funding is not actually helping people that really need it. And that's the concern for me.
So it's almost like a Band-Aid for a very large wound. It really needs, metaphoric stitches, so to speak, and they're just putting a little Band-Aid on this thing. So in essence, what you're saying is this money ultimately by default is really going to people that don't really need it, because it's just enough money to like buffer people that can already afford it anyway, but it's not sufficient and it's not enough money for people that couldn't afford it otherwise.
Correct.
This is really interesting to me because this kind of clears up something that I've never fully understood about how this works. Because people who are, and I was going to try to play devil's advocate and offer this as an argument, but people who support the voucher program will often talk about, and you even use the phrase, Sarah, school choice.
Mhm.
And I've always found that argument to be not without some merit, because if you're paying into the system as a taxpayer, you're one of the taxpayers contributing. So why shouldn't you have some choice in the matter? But if like you said, if you are a low or middle class person in terms of your income, so you don't qualify, or you qualify to get the voucher, but you don't have enough, the voucher is not going to cover it, so the voucher is of no use to you. So the only people benefiting from the voucher are higher income people who can take that voucher and make up the rest. Then yeah, that is that's not a good program. And Todd, I think you put it perfectly. It's a small Band-Aid for a giant wound, and it doesn't really do what the people who are proponents of the voucher system claim that it does. In other
Right.
words, yeah.
Correct.
And absolutely. And Matt and Sarah, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Todd, please.
I was going to say it's also very misleading because, to be honest, prior to like my gut reaction, of course, I don't have kids and all of that, so I'm from the outside looking in. But like from an
Same.
observer's standpoint, it sounds like a great idea, right? So like on paper, this sounds like a cool thing, because again, I saw it as, if I didn't know any better, and certainly as if I were in a low informed individual, which I am not, but if I happen to be the average American, then I guess I could take out the risk and say, I mean, I could take, I'm going to take a stab at it and say that, like, to that person, it almost looks like those of us that are saying, oh, the voucher program is not positive, like, I'm sure they're going to spin it to say, well, they just don't want you guys to be able to have choice. We're preventing them from choice. But I think the two key things that you said there is, number one, in order to make this program work, it's taking from existing programs, which maybe not a lot of people understand. And then number two, there's no, it's hinting, it's insinuating that there is money to make a choice. But if literally all it's doing is just padding an expense that's already fairly cost prohibitive, then really what's going to happen is it's almost like, when you go and you get that those people that want to buy a luxury car, it's like, they throw in the floor mats. You know what I mean? Like, is
right. That's a good analogy.
You still have to be able to afford the car.
And,
Yep.
and you have to be able to afford the upkeep of the car, right?
Exactly.
And then let's take that analogy a step further and say, then you actually have to upkeep the roads that the car is on.
Correct.
So it's great that we are, trying to support choice. That's a wonderful thing. But the biggest choice that we can give our communities is supporting the further development and program options in our public schools. Because without that, we don't have the roads to drive on to allow education to then.
Did you hear her, Matt?
Something's gone wrong with the audio on your end, Sarah. I don't know if you can hear us, but
yeah,
it got very almost like you're underwater all of a sudden.
Robotic.
Oh, I think she's she logged out. She's going to log back in. Well, while we wait for her to get back in, though, this has been interesting because I never thought of it that way, Todd. It never really occurred to me about how, because school choice on its face, it sounds like a great idea, right? And I've always,
lot of these things sound like a great idea,
right? But the devil is in the details. I think
that's the game they play. Right. I think that's the game they play. They hope those of us, because all of us, none of us are experts in everything, right? And especially being, a gay man that doesn't have kids and all of this. So like, to me, it's like what I know about this is what I read and what I listen to on podcasts. And also, I mean, like I said, I'm certainly more informed than the average person, but nonetheless, there still is that ability for people to spin it if I'm not really careful at what I look at. You know what I mean? Like I have to really dive into it and do a deeper dive. She just texted me and said, all of a sudden it's not working. Okay.
She
Well,
should try clicking that link again if she can.
okay.
Because
All
I
right.
thought I saw her reappear, but then she appeared and then
All right.
disappeared again.
Let me tell her here.
Yeah. But
It's the
if you are
beauty
streaming
of being
live,
a personal guest of hers. I mean, a personal friend. Hold on a second here.
Yeah.
Hey, Sarah, go ahead and re-click the link. Of course, I call her Sarah, but she'll get that.
But yeah, if you are just streaming live, this is Hanging Left, and I'm Matt Connarton, and Todd Ayer is here, and our guest is Sarah. I'm still not sure how to say her last name, Todd.
It's Sarah Chadzinski. That's what I always
Chadzinski.
If you start it with like 2 words, and then ultimately it flows.
Okay. All right.
But she likes Sarah C. She goes by Sarah C. as well. That's an easy way to do it.
Yeah. Absolutely. Very good.
If need be, I might.
Think she's here.
All right.
It says source hidden. What is going on here? That was weird. She was there and then she disappeared. Click that link again, Sarah. I don't know what's going on.
Oh, the beauty of technology.
It will fail us at times. Yeah. I don't know. Can she come sit next to you?
She can. Yeah, that's fine.
Why wouldn't that work?
It would.
Can we do that? Can we do that?
Let me talk to her. Hey, Sarah, if you would like, you can certainly come in here and join us. It's, at this point, it's no secret now that we've said it live that we're in the same place here.
Yeah, that might be the easiest.
Hey, gotta just go with it, right?
That's right. Yeah.
That's the beauty of podcasting.
Yeah. I'm curious to hear more of her thoughts on education and
yeah, for sure.
She mentioned international education too, which I'm curious about.
Yeah, I mean, so she's done a lot of work with the Ukraine. To be quite honest, I understand it on a very high level, but I guess I'm not quite sure of what exactly she does for them, but I know she does a lot. So yeah, that's definitely something that you'll be interested in hearing.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Oh, here she is. Come on in. Oh no, that's Jason. Hold on 1 second here.
Does Jason want to say hello?
Oh, Jason. Oh my God, this is like. I guess CNN's not going to sign us. Jason.
I guess not. Well, they're signing people for pretty cheap these days. You never know.
Hi, you can come right here.
Oh.
Technical difficulty.
Yeah, it's important that you're here, so you can come right here. Do you want to sit? And I'll just.
We're just gonna make this work.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, one of the things, Matt, that I keep thinking about is, when you're speaking truth, there's always people that want to keep that truth quiet. So I don't know who's listening, but we're gonna keep speaking the truth no matter what. Doesn't matter who interrupts us.
Right, exactly.
Right. Absolutely.
Including the truth that we're in the same place. There you go. There's another truth.
There you go.
Well, it's good to have backups when recording. So thanks, Matt.
Bring me back in. Of course. We were talking about education. Now I'm curious too about, you mentioned international education earlier.
Yeah.
And does that relate to Ukraine or what's, I'm curious about that.
No, actually, I was teaching in Warsaw, Poland. We actually lived abroad for a year, and I was able to teach at an international school there and gain that experience. And what I was going to share, before I got interrupted by whatever technology snafu just happened, is that, I have the experience of being a public school teacher, and I have the experience of being a private school teacher. And where the vouchers are going are to schools that are not held accountable to the state, that don't have regulations like the state-funded schools do. And as we're moving away from this, as you're taking funding away from schools, you're actually promoting less funding going to that public school, which then causes property taxes to go up. And what does New Hampshire have the highest? Property tax. So when I talk about economy and education being intrinsically linked, that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So if we're taking funding and action away from our schools, then we're driving up property taxes on people who are already paying huge amounts in property taxes that really don't need to be burdened with that and shouldn't be burdened with that.
Yeah, and that's something that seems to be that's kind of a bipartisan issue, right? Because
It
I
sure
hear
is.
everybody complains about property taxes, at
Yeah.
least in this state.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
Although, I mean, we do need to tax something. I mean, I don't know. I'll be the, I'll be the dark cloud on that one. You know, but that's a whole other issue. You know,
Well, but they're linked, right? They're
right,
linked. And so the thing is yes, we do need taxes. But then the question is, how are we doing that? How are we using those funds? And if we're
Hmm.
taking funds out of a pot, I mean,
right,
it's not an infinite pot, right? That's why we have a
correct.
budget.
Yeah.
Then we need to be able to refill it. And as this voucher program continues and becomes limitless, the governor will be required to refill that pot because
Yeah.
that funding is coming from our tax dollars.
Correct, correct. And
Yeah.
and my bigger concern also, Sarah, I don't know if you feel this way, but what people maybe sort of the elephant in the room, and people quite literally when we're talking about the Republicans, the elephant in the room there is that they're looking to ideally not just give it to people for private school funding and this type of program and charter schools and this nature, but ultimately they'd like to transition it into religious-based schools and like, you
It
know,
already is.
yeah,
It already
so
is. You can use your voucher for paying for a religious-based school.
Yep. Yep. No doubt. No doubt.
which becomes basically propaganda and not about education.
Sarah, can I ask you this though? Do you, in terms of, because sometimes when we talk about taxes, and this is something where I've historically disagreed with Democrats, although I think it's only a fraction of Democrats who support this idea. But the idea of bringing about a sales tax or a state income tax or something, which I personally think is a bad idea because, well, for a couple of reasons. But I'm curious to know your position on that because I don't think that's the right solution. But what say you?
Yeah, I think that there are a lot of different ways that we can meet the needs of funding for our schools. And
Yeah.
we look at how we're taxing. We can look at some of these pools of funding, like the funding pool that the vouchers are being taken out of to support progress in our schools. We can look at the fact that recently we had taxes cut to our highest income bracket businesses and otherwise in New Hampshire, which created a deficit in our state budget.
Yeah.
So we're looking at and we're talking about taxation and how it directly impacts schools and property tax. It's a much bigger and more complex issue than that. And I think we need to get a bunch of people and community members and business owners included to get in on this and say, hey, how can we actually create a solution that meets the needs of everyday Granite Staters, that isn't saddling Granite Staters with huge property taxes that are not actually feasible for them and are pushing people out of our state, good people out of our state.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're going to have to explore. I mean, you know, again, I'll be the naysayer. I actually don't have an issue with, you know, I'm one of those people that I spent 20 years in the DC metro area, so you know, it's probably only about as untaxed as Massachusetts would be taxed. So like, I don't
Mm.
have a problem. I've always believed that you get more for your money. You know, you get more you get what you pay for, basically. So I think that those of us that can afford to pay taxes and those of us that can afford to pay for social programs should expect to pay. I mean, I don't have a problem taxing people that can afford to pay for this stuff. I mean, you know, but I'm not a politician. I think it's something we'd have to explore, and I certainly think it's something we'd have to have a dialogue about. But I do feel that as the cost of living goes up, as Social Security is in danger of not being funded, as Medicaid, all these things, all these social programs, and in fact, we want to increase the social programs, then we're going to have to figure out a way to pay for these things. So, especially those that can afford to do so, you know, it's not unfair to ask these people to pay more of their fair share.
Well, and I think, Matt, it comes back to that analogy that we were going down before about being able to maintain the roads, right?
Mhm.
Are we only going to pay for the roads that we drive on? Sure. Okay. So there's tolls, right? We put tolls in place for some of those, but in our
Yeah.
towns, our communities, you know, our roads are maintained and our schools are an essential backbone of our communities to support the developing upcoming generations. And that ripples out and just so many levels. And so I think
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and so I think looking at the schooling issue really is more complex than that. And because that is one of the
Absolutely.
biggest reasons that people have talked about, how do we deal with this increased property tax?
You know,
Right.
and maybe an argument would be, and I would be interested in this, like maybe so the argument for like increased property taxes or like property taxes being unfair is that you have situations where you have like people that maybe began as agricultural, so they have a large swath of land, but they don't
Hmm.
necessarily have large income. So
Yeah.
theoretically, they should be paying a lot of taxes, right? Because they have a lot of land. But the reality is, it's not like this land is necessarily making the kind of money it needs to make to be able to afford the taxes. So I think
It's a good
you could
point.
almost argue that an income tax would be more fair than a property tax. So, you know, maybe slightly reduce property tax or figure out a different way to assess property taxes, but then add an income tax. Because I do feel like people, especially at the higher income brackets, should be paying some income tax. I mean, why should they be allowed to come and live here? Why should this become a freeloader state for millionaires and billionaires? Although we don't have a lot of billionaires at this point. But seriously,
Right.
you know, New Hampshire should not want to become a tax shelter for rich people that just don't want to pay taxes.
I think that's a valid argument. I do think though that it would be to actually pass an income tax in the
Oh
state
yeah, they're
or
not.
a sales tax, it would be politically suicidal.
Sure, that's why I'm
Um,
not running.
yeah.
There's that.
Yeah.
Well, I think Matt, again, it is a more complex versus isolated issue, and when we take an
Sure.
issue in an isolated standpoint, we're not actually looking at the whole system. And we
Mhm.
need to step back and we need to look at the whole system. We need to look at the whole state system, and then we need to deal with the federal system, because one of the things is, New Hampshire gives a lot. And it really is not getting the support that it needs from the state and
Mhm.
from the federal government into the state. And now we're seeing that even more, and we're seeing the impacts of that even more.
And you know,
Yeah.
one of the things we talked about one time, Sarah, in one of our episodes, is that a lot of people don't realize this, but ironically, the states that tend to be taxed the most are the blue states, and people don't realize that because that's where the incomes are. That's where the greatest incomes are. That's where
Yep.
all the industry
You
is.
mean on a federal level?
Yeah, on a federal level.
Right.
Yep.
And then
Yep.
and yet like these, and then we're paying for these red states to basically do all these draconian things we don't want them to do. So that's my bigger issue. On a federal level, I have an even bigger issue with taxes. But you know, hey, that's a show. That's another time. Show for another time. Or
This question too. I'm really curious. Actually, I don't know. And Todd, you and I haven't discussed this either, so I don't know what you think about this either. I'm really curious because this is something where I tend to agree with Republicans, but I'll go ahead and throw this out there.
uh-oh.
A state issue. I fully support the repeal of the state car inspections. I'm curious what both of you think.
Why?
I'm happy to see it go.
I mean, so for one thing, I definitely would probably, my gut is no, because then you're going to have, as it is, we already have these fools driving these like big gas guzzling trucks that they purposely seem to not want to follow EPA laws,
Yeah.
pouring pollution into our population. Not to mention, this is the Granite State. This is a beautiful state. Like we're harmonious with nature. So I'd be inclined to say no. I have no desire to like allow people to put cars on the road that aren't safe cars and wreck the environment any more than it already is, damaged.
I think that happens anyway. But what do you think, Sarah?
Well, I'm curious why you support it, Matt, because I think
That
one
is
of the
interesting.
things that we need to be doing more is hearing each other out. So I'm really curious why you're in support of this. What hits home?
So a quick anecdote. So my first job when I was in high school was working at Sears. Remember Sears?
Oh, I do.
Yeah. That was my first job. And I did not work in the automotive department at Sears, but I learned from my coworkers very quickly. It became an open secret within the store. Don't bring your car there for an inspection. But why? I would say to my coworkers, I work here. I'm an employee. Those guys are always nice to me. They're very friendly. And, they're my friends. What's the problem? And what my coworker explained to me is, Matt, here's the thing. It doesn't matter how nice they are to you. It doesn't matter if if you think they're your friend. When you bring your car here for an inspection, it might only have 40,000 miles on it. And for an absolute fact, there's nothing wrong with it. But you're not going to drive out with an inspection sticker. This is Sears. It doesn't work that way. you're going to leave here with a $1,500 estimate for work that your car needs to pass inspection that it probably doesn't even really need. So I got soured pretty young on the whole. To me, it's a scam because we all know, it's either happened to us or we know somebody it's happened to. Time to get the car inspected, and you get this huge estimate handed to you, and then maybe you take it somewhere you trust a little more to get a second opinion, or maybe you have a friend look at it and they say, "Oh, they're stealing from you, and they're extorting you." They put a gun to your head and say, "You're going to give us all this money, or you don't get your sticker." And I'm just kind of I'm over it. I'm done with being extorted every year.
Well, yeah. And I'll just quickly say something. I would agree with that, Matt, but lucky, I guess I'm lucked out because I've never had that experience. Like,
that's
people
good.
Pretty much always told me, bottom line. But I've also always gone to a family mechanic.
Well, that's good. Yeah.
It's inspected, and whatever needs to happen, and I trust this person.
No, that's good. If you have somebody you trust, that's great. Not all of us are so lucky.
Gouged.
Yeah.
So, Matt, I think this brings up an important point in terms of accountability. So it sounds like, and we don't have anybody from Sears on here to defend them, so I don't want to attack.
Oh, this became a national scandal, actually, right. Because not only was it happening at the location that I worked at, but at one point, I mean, this was pre-internet, so the whole story died a quick death.
Right.
But apparently this was happening nationally at Sears Automotive locations. So I'm not.
Again, it comes down to accountability. So I have been, I don't even want to count the years I've been driving at this point, but and I have not once had an inspection myself that has been that way. I've had inspections that have been like, you really need to get your tires looked at. You're getting pretty low. Yeah. Like, oh yeah, I did do a lot of driving this year. Yeah. Or, your brake pads are pretty worn. You need to get those checked at some point, in the next 3 months. Just keep an eye on those. Yeah. And I really appreciate that. So I think what it comes down to is making sure that our systems do have accountability. And again, this goes right back to education and vouchers, right? Like across the board, what are our accountability systems and being able to have these systems function properly. And when we have the car inspections for safety, again, this is like our roads. This is like, we as a community, we're not driving in bubbles and isolated. Sure. We are driving together on the road. We are on the road together. We are in this community together, whether it's our roads, our septic systems, our waterways, our schools, our vehicles, right? So how are we showing up for each other in community and making sure that we're engaging in a manner that actually allows everyone else to function as well and doesn't interfere with that. Mm-hmm. So I think it's something that we should talk about more, Matt, in terms of, what would a good system be to make sure that our cars on the road are safe? And so I am concerned about that.
I mean, and to that point, Sarah, I think that, right now we're in sort of two states, of political stagnation. We've got, the MAGA Republicans on one side that seem to want to do everything and sabotage everything and have zero accountability. And then we have the DNC, which seems to, a lot of the Democrats, at least like the traditional Democrats, they seem to want to sort of either excuse things or minimize things or not offer any solutions, like say that's awful, but how horrible, but not do anything about it. Like, so I think whether, red, blue, or purple or yellow, whatever color you are, we need accountability in our leadership in general. I mean, I think accountability and trust and integrity, those three things need to come back in all parties and with all political leaders and civic leaders.
Yeah,
sure. Come back though. I don't think those things ever existed. And
I think they did. I'd like to think that there were people out there that had it. I mean, maybe not as many as we would hope.
Oh, sure.
Maybe, but there were people. I mean,
But I think the system right from the very beginning, because honestly, not to sound overly cynical, but I think there's an element of just plain old human nature to it. I think any political system is going to have a certain lack of accountability because with power comes, the more power that is amassed, the less obligation to be accountable, people tend to have. And I think that's, and I don't say that, I'm not challenging anything you said. I think everything you both just said about accountability is very, very important. I'm just saying that's part of the challenge, because
Right.
It's like I hate to say it, it's such an overused cliche, but it's valid. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. And that's,
So
I don't think there's ever been true accountability ever, probably in human history.
I mean, not to interrupt. The sad part about that is, I mean, there's you, there's myself, there's Sarah. So there are people out there that have a level of influence that actually do think beyond our little, blinders and what personally benefits me. Like, for instance, I could say, oh, I don't care about school. I'm a gay man. I don't have kids. But like, that's ignorant. You know what I mean? So like, I think we have to stop. I think that the problem, at least from my perspective, is that the United States is almost on this hyper, yes, they're democratic, but they're also hyper capitalist. And I think that they've equated capitalism with this like uniformity of like me. It's all about me, just the individual. And no society can function that way. Like, it's absolutely impossible. If everybody got what they wanted all the time, 24/7, then we'd all be screwed. So, because there's no way to do that. It's so I think that we have to get away from, I mean, I dare I say it, I think we need to follow some of the European models where these people seem to be okay with certain things being government subsidized, certain things, God forbid, be socialistic, but but it's not a dirty word, and I think we need to get away from that. Like, this whole idea of like success and self-preservation at any cost, including stepping on people that already are being stepped on. Like, it's really unnecessary. And I think it's my job, your job, Sarah's job to push this forward to the younger generations too, and hopefully try to, reinstate a sense of civility and a sense of civic duty.
Yeah, absolutely. What say you, Sarah? I'm really curious. How do we do that?
So I think one of the things that Todd hit on that I'll kind of dovetail on, because there are things I agree with and things I don't, but is really that we're operating in silos. And when we operate in silos, we have a closed system that is completely isolated, that is not able to take in new information, that is not able to be resilient. And we're seeing that across the board. And that actually, it breaks community bonds, and it dehumanizes us, because we keep thinking, well, that's not my problem, or that won't impact me. And the reality is it does. Those ripples do come out. So like, Todd mentioning, I don't have kids, so why do I care about the school system? Well, the school system impacts your property tax. It impacts home value. It impacts, if you own a home, then
everything.
If you're lucky enough to own a home in New Hampshire right now, right? Because that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
But I think in terms of accountability, which I think is the point that you're getting at, Matt, right? Like, how do we actually instill accountability and further this at a state level, at a federal level? And what I want to point out is that at our federal level, the current administration has now gutted all agencies that would have held the administration accountable.
Right. All the watch groups,
completely. And including the FBI. The FBI is responsible for investigating the administration office. So
it's all been a coup in slow motion.
Exactly.
A slow motion coup.
So we're watching this happen. So what we as a people need to do is stand up and say, I don't think so. This is not going to happen on our watch. We need checks and balances for this exact reason.
Right.
Because we do need to be held accountable, and we do need to be held, in check when we are in positions of power. People who are in positions of power have a great ability to impact and affect change. But the greatest impactors of change are the people.
And to that point, Sarah, I think the problem with a lot of people, and for whatever reason, I was never this way, but a lot of people, and I don't blame them for being this way, it seems insurmountable. It seems overwhelming. It seems impossible. Because what they're trying to do is save the whole world at once, which is impossible, right? None of us can save the whole world at once. But together, as we are, mobilized and organized, we can make incremental changes that will ultimately lead to better habits and better behaviors that will ultimately give us a better, more sustainable and seamless system. I mean, it is possible. It's just, we all have to do our part. And if everybody did a little bit, then there would be no obligation for a few of us to bear the burden of like thousands, So, I would love to like have this more universal accountability of like everybody, it's like I say to people all the time, like when we're dealing with organizers, for instance, we have older people and they say, oh, I can't march like that. You know what I say? You don't have to march like that, but fill out a postcard, talk to your neighbor, tell your story, like, stand up for what you believe in. All these things matter and they may seem small, but collectively they're huge.
That's a really important point too about, and I like what you said about, people because you're right. People begin to feel overwhelmed and discouraged because they want to save the world, and you can't save the world all by yourself. You can only do your part. You can only do what you can. And hopefully if we're all working together to do what we can and do our parts, then together we can all save the world. But we've got we can all only deal with really what's in front of us and deal with that first, and then maybe expand out from there. And but you gotta, it's easy to become mentally overwhelmed by it.
Sure. But the answer is not to do nothing. And that's the problem. Exactly. People think, oh, well, I can't do as huge of an impact as I want, so I might as well do nothing. But what they don't realize is that, with stagnation comes rot. And people don't realize that. It's not, with stagnation doesn't come homeostasis. Like, you ultimately have to do something. When you don't grow, ultimately you decay and die. So there's no option here. Like, this is not an option to do something, because it's all of our world. So if we want this world to exist, we got to do something.
I'm inspired because behind us there is an image of the Polish eagle right up here.
Okay.
And one of the things that I found amazing living in Warsaw is that Stare Miasto, the old city, was completely razed in World War II, like brought to rubble, complete rubble. And with the pennies of the people and the work of the people, they rebuilt it completely. And it's absolutely beautiful in all of its revamped historic glory. And I do think that's really important, as Todd mentioned, as you pointed out, Matt, that each of us, in whatever capacity we have something to offer and contribute to this. And altogether, as cliche and maybe as cheesy as it sounds, we really have the capability to make a difference.
We do.
I had the incredible experience of, in some of my teaching, I've done a lot of experiential ed. And so some of that has been through farm education. And in one of my teaching positions, we moved a greenhouse.
Wow.
Okay. We moved a massive greenhouse. And what we did is, just like barn moving, we all grabbed a piece and were coordinated. And that's the key piece.
Yeah.
Because when you are coordinated, you are able to do massive things together. And we can do that. And moving that greenhouse and seeing those middle schoolers see what they could do if they all came together and worked together was incredible and so empowering.
Right.
And I think what becomes really hard too is like, I know in our house, 3 kids and working, and what is the time? What is the extra time you have in your day, or anyone has in their day, to give to this, right? When you're trying to pay the bills, keep the roof overhead, keep food on the table. Where is that little wiggle room that you have to bring into this? And so I think it's really important that, those of us who are in positions to lead community or bring community together continue to try to find openings for people to jump in and make things more accessible.
Absolutely.
Because everybody does have something to offer.
And make it welcoming, like welcome people in. And, I think it's important. The other thing too, I think we have to move away from like discussing, differences, as far as like discussing differences and celebrating differences is one thing, but discussing differences and pointing out each other's flaws is counterproductive. Like, it doesn't help. So we need to focus more on what people can do rather than what people can't do. And I think that the other thing too, this is the thing that I'm very modernist about, in the sense that, like, look, I'm not going to lie. I get a high from this. Like, it makes me happy to help. And I don't
Hmm.
think there's I'm not ashamed of saying that. So like, I'm not asking people to be selfless, because it's not selfless. Like, it's my world, just like it's your world. And I am
Right.
getting something from this. And I'm
Right.
not going to apologize for that. So, I'm not asking for people to do the impossible, be invested in something just, as like saints or whatever,
Right.
Yeah, you're going to get something from this. And I hope you do. I hope you
Right.
do.
Yeah.
I mean, and the other piece of that, Matt, that I think about, you mentioned Ukraine earlier. We haven't really talked about my involvement there, but for
Yeah.
the last couple of years, I've been building a nationwide coalition focused on advocating for Ukraine, and it comes down to that exact conversation of what do you have to offer and when. It doesn't
Hmm.
mean that you are always on, right? These things are a marathon, and we have to be able to tap in and tap out and have a team. And for 3 years, this nationwide coalition has been advocating for and working for, in the interest of our own national security.
Absolutely.
If we look at what Ukraine just did to some nuclear capable carrying aircraft
Hmm.
recently,
Yeah.
it is in our interest.
Absolutely.
Right? And we're
Yeah.
all capable of doing this, whether it's a phone call or an email or even a conversation with a neighbor, and making
Yeah.
that personal connection.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's really important. We all have something to offer.
We really do.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. What haven't we talked about in terms of issues that we should?
50 million of them. We're going to have her on again.
Well,
would that be okay, Sarah?
Absolutely. I would love to be on with you guys. Maybe we can get, better technological system for me, but I'm grateful for of sharing a space to make sure that this works and happens in this day and age. It's a great platform, but I mean, we haven't talked about healthcare, Matt. We haven't talked about Medicaid, Medicare. We haven't talked about, the housing crisis we see in New Hampshire. We haven't talked about the homelessness and opioid crisis and lack of support for that, despite a lot of grassroots efforts. I think there are so many topics, when you break it down to cover, but they all come down to human rights. Mm-hmm. In our great state of New Hampshire, live free or die doesn't mean or die, right? It means give all you have to make sure we're able to live free.
Right.
And that freedom is the freedom to liberty in pursuit of happiness, right? So life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. What is life? Okay, right? Let's talk about education. Let's talk about healthcare. Let's talk about making sure that our people can have homes that they can afford, because basic level survival is not living. It's like I keep thinking, like, we're keeping people
who wants to
above
just
water
exist.
just enough with like, their nose in their mouth. And that's
treading water and they can barely. I agree.
And so I think those are issues we need to tackle.
Yeah. And also stop asking people, like, my favorite, what I try to put in perspective is like, how is it fair? How would it be fair for me to call certain things like luxuries or privileges when all of these things that we categorize as privileges, I take for granted? I have all of them without a second thought. So why am I any more like, why is it my right to have these things, but it's not other people's right? And I think that, especially a lot of our political leaders, and certainly some of the ones that, just did this crap with a big, beautiful bill, which we could cover, whatever, like, that's basically what they're saying. They're almost saying, like, do as I say, not as I do. Like, I mean, honestly, can you think of a better social program that supports people than the U.S. Congress? I mean, these people are set for life. Like, talk about a good welfare program.
Yeah.
Yeah. And one of the things on that, we haven't talked about the implications of the bill that was just passed. That's a ticking time bomb.
Right.
Because the things don't go into effect until the next Congress comes in. So it's basically like a bomb, a TNT package with a long wire that was just lit to explode when the next Congress comes in.
Although we'll sabotage it and take it down too. So there is that.
That is the power of the people. We have the ability to interject and reverse that.
Absolutely.
And
there's going to be
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, there's going to be a pretty big, I mean, historically, this would be expected anyway, but I think it's going to be a very large blue wave in 26.
I do too. But when we get on that wave, let's like do something with it this time. Like,
Right.
let's stop. And I'm not saying it's not important to reach across the aisle, because I really do believe it is important. But
Yeah.
also, it's
Yeah.
important to hold some of these people to accountability. I mean,
Yeah.
some of these people are outright being criminal, and there is
Yeah.
nothing wrong with telling people, you know, and this could be a whole other topic. But we've touched on some of this stuff. Like, for instance, the way that ICE is behaving and things like that, that is so un-American and just so, it makes me sick. So, like, you know, it's okay to say to people, I don't care if they're in power. It's okay to say, you know what you did is not okay. It's not right. And we're not going to tolerate it.
Yeah. You know, Matt, to that point, you know, one of the things I didn't share about my personal story is, you know, my grandmother is one of 800 people that survived the Łódź or Lodz ghetto in Poland. I have literally stood holding her hand next to the grave that she was forced to dig for herself and narrowly escaped being in a matter of 24 hours.
Right.
Oh my God.
So these things happen incrementally.
That's crazy.
Okay. And what we've seen just put together in Florida is incredibly concerning. What we've seen in the budget that was just passed that gives our administration essentially his own private service of force that is not held accountable by, like, for example, our armed services that take a pledge to uphold the Constitution. This is a concern. This is cause for alarm.
Absolutely.
And that does bring us back to your point of where people get paralyzed in, okay, what do I do?
Yeah.
And at this point, what do? You reach out. You talk to your neighbors. You talk to your community. You get involved. You make sure that you're communicating and saying, we want change. Yes, absolutely. We want change. We want to look at our federal budget. We want to look at our state budget. But we don't want to be ripping our neighbors off the street without due process. No. I mean, very frankly, Matt, my 96-year-old grandmother, who I was just mentioning, who's still alive, and here in this country, she's a naturalized citizen. We've just had conversations of denaturalization. So that's talking about my 96-year-old grandmother who already dug her own grave and lived in a Nazi ghetto camp.
Yeah.
These are real people.
Right.
And I think the more we bring real faces to this, the more real it becomes.
And also, here's something that I hope, you know, I don't know who's listening, but here's a little bit of a secret. If you're quiet, that's when they win. Don't be afraid to have a voice. That's actually what they want us to do, is be quiet. If you're not quiet, they don't win. Half their power is perceived power. And we can, as much as they have it, we can take it away. And we just have to stand up and demand that they work for us. We don't work for them.
Well, you know, and I would just say too, you know, to Democrats who feel discouraged by what's going on, you know, if you don't think it's possible to seize power and wield power, they've proven you can, right? I mean, look at what they've done. They managed to reelect after January 6th.
A felon.
They actually managed to reelect the guy behind an attempted overthrow of the government, and yes, who is a multi-time convicted felon and all of it. They managed to put that guy back in the White House. So you can
fill the administration. You can fill the administration with a bunch of predators.
Yeah. So I would just say to Democrats, because, and Sarah, you know, Todd has already heard me rant about this stuff, but, you know, Democrats, I think sometimes are a little afraid to fight, or they don't want to be perceived as being unfair, you know, fighting too dirty or whatever. But look at what they do on the other side. I mean, we gotta be tough. We gotta, you know, and forceful and not be afraid. You know,
I think you just hit it in that last part, Matt, of we have to not be afraid to speak up and stand up. And that doesn't mean that it's not terrifying. That doesn't mean that it's not concerning, right? And I think, you know, to kind of boil this down a little bit, you know, yes, I am a registered Democrat. However, I think this now goes far beyond party lines.
Oh, absolutely.
Far beyond party lines. This is about humans. This is about our neighbors, our colleagues, our friends, our family. This is no longer, left, right, middle. This needs to be forward. We've
Hmm.
gotten so hung up
Mm-hmm.
on these culture wars
Mm-hmm.
that it's smoke and mirrors.
Yeah.
We've been
Yeah.
distracted by what has happened, and we've been pitted against each other when ultimately many of us actually find common ground. We don't have to agree on everything,
Right.
right? I'm never going to convince somebody of the same beliefs I have, but we have to find common ground so that we can create policy that actually serves the people and meets the needs of the people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important here, is that we need to build coalition like we've never built before, and we need to be coordinated and action, and we need to go beyond party lines, because this is
Yeah.
no longer one or the other. This is about humans. This is about us. This is about our people, our schools, our
Right.
children, and our families.
Yeah, and to back that too, it's about like this system right now, that if everybody was really honest with themselves, there's a very 1% of 1% that are winning here, and everybody else is getting screwed in the process.
Yep.
So we all have to wake up and realize that and say no more. Like, we didn't ask for a king, we didn't ask for a oligarch, and it's time we all say that loudly and proudly. Like, enough is enough.
Yeah, and I think, to that point, Matt, I think that what we were talking about earlier about giving people access, right?
Yeah.
So for people like me, like Todd, like you guys on this platform, of being able to give people access and ability to act in a way that they are comfortable with, but also, within the work that I've done the last 3 years, there have been comments that really resonated with me. And one of them was recently from, no, it's okay.
Still talk. I just got to plug this in.
From Oleksandra Matvichuk, who's a Nobel Prize winner, who said, in these times, it is absolutely essential that ordinary people do extraordinary things. And those extraordinary things,
I love that,
can have immense impact. Because very frankly, like, I don't think there's anything special about me. Why was I able to help build this nationwide coalition, right? Because I decided to, because I stepped up to.
Yeah.
We all have a capacity to play a role in this and support. And that doesn't mean getting up on stage and speaking. That's not everybody's cup of tea, right? Like, that's okay. But maybe it's making a phone call. Maybe it's writing an op-ed. Maybe it's, creating a postcard campaign to your locally elected officials' office. And then speaking out to your neighbors and community.
And start with your circle and work outward, like
Yeah.
a lot of times, I mean, I've had conversations with people, that initially they didn't see it, a certain way. And then I would say something like, well, your child is voting this way. Why don't you talk to your child? If not me, talk to them, talk to who you trust.
Yeah. Yeah.
And see why they believe in what they believe. And the person literally said, you know what, I'm going to do that, because I don't know what I think the way I think, and why I want to do this, and I'm, I like to believe that changed that hearts and minds, but I think that, I think this is all very possible, but not just possible, but we have to do it. I mean, in my opinion, that's just my belief, but.
And do it with commitment and energy. And Todd, you've heard me say this too. One of the things that really frustrated me after the election was the endless amounts of hand wringing.
Oh yeah.
That I saw on the left, like people just like, what do we do now? How do we approach this? Do we try to be somewhat conciliatory toward MAGA? Do we work with them where we can, or do we just be mad at them about everything? Or what do we do? And it creates this, and I remember, Todd, you laughed the first time you heard me use this term. It created this analysis paralysis where everybody's like, oh, we got to figure out how, and then you spend so much time trying to figure out how to approach it. Then it gets to be too late. It's like, no, you just got to do it. Advocate for it. Work with them where you can, but
do it. Fight, make mistakes.
Yep.
Learn from the mistakes. No one's saying it's gonna be right the first time. We are gonna fall down. We are gonna, get bruised. We are gonna take some hits. That's life.
Yeah.
Like, no one said it's easy, but it's necessary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I echo that. And Matt, I think the analysis paralysis is something really important. And I also think that we have a lot of people that are disheartened, that feel like their voices don't matter.
Yeah.
And I think it's people like us who are able to engage with the community to be a loudspeaker for those voices.
Right.
I mean, Matt, very frankly, I'm only here because other people literally fought for my family. That is the only reason I'm alive.
I mean,
Yeah.
I am willing and ready to do the same.
Yeah.
And I will continue to do so until we are in a place where we can have policy that actually meets the needs of our people.
absolutely, Sarah. And I think those of us that have been in the fight for a long time and have had personal, challenges, but, really learn from those challenges. Hopefully that's the ideal, right? I mean,
Listen, I'm in education. Okay. I'm a teacher. Mistakes are learning experiences and,
Yep.
not things to look at as failures. We all have to work together and learn together and show up how we can. And
yeah,
we are imperfect humans having this human experience together. And I think that's the most essential thing to remember.
absolutely.
We are all humans doing this together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, thank God we're not perfect. I think it makes it much more interesting that we're not, frankly.
I would agree.
Yeah, it'd be a pretty boring world if we were. Well, so we're at about an hour. Should we wrap this one up?
Sure. I mean, up to you. What do you think, Sarah?
Is there
Yeah,
anything we
I think-
anything we didn't talk about that we're
No,
not
there's-
on a time limit. I don't know if there's
That's
anything
true.
else you wanted to get to today. We can.
I think, that was a good capsule, Matt. I think we have a lot more to talk about.
Yeah.
Look forward to, engaging with you guys more and using this platform to get the message out and bring people in. And I think that's important for anyone who's watching to remember that your personal platform is incredibly powerful.
Right.
And being able to use that is a readily available tool that you have.
And also for people that are watching, tell your friends, tell your neighbors, tell all of that. I mean, obviously, because I want people to watch, but more importantly, we created this platform because we want to give you guys a platform. Like, one of my jobs doing what I do is I'm giving you guys the tools for your voice. And I'm also giving you the okay. I'm giving you the green light. Come on, like, talk to me, challenge me, disagree with me. I hope you do. That's what this is all about.
It's about conversation.
Yeah.
It's about conversation, problem solving, and figuring this out together, because that's the only way we're going to get through it. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Todd. Thanks for having this platform.
Yes, thank you so much, Sarah. We really appreciate it. We look forward to having you on again.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Wonderful to have you on. And Todd, a pleasure as always.
Yep, absolutely.
And everybody follow us on social media, of course. And Todd, you want to mention a website or anything or where should people go to find you to keep up with everything you're doing?
Right now, I guess, certainly follow the YouTube channel, the IMP, what is it again?
The IPM Nation YouTube channel.
Yeah. And I need
to
do a better job, like getting on my stuff, but yeah.
Okay.
I don't know.
But we all have our strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah, that's not my strength.
So, we got to help each other out. That's why teams are so important.
Yeah, organization's not my strength, I fully admit.
Not a problem. All right, very good. All right, episode 5 of Hanging Left is in the books. And thank you to everyone watching. Thank you to everyone who listens to the podcast later. Thank you, Todd. And Sarah, thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.